vest.
Hey, thanks. I actually got a lot of comments on this last Friday. It's the first Friday we had them. We just got these last week, and walking the sideline, people went, "Hey, nice vest there." And I even had one kid come up to me and say, "Hey, where can I get one of those?" And I was like, wow, we just got these ourselves. But yeah, it's just kind of nice. There used to be a day when we would go to a high school football game and you'd want to be like anonymous, like you just kind of blend in, But now people see us, they know us, and because of things like this and other video things that we're doing, it's okay. I like that people see us and we know we're out there.
You don't have to know my name, but you can just say, "Hey, 360 Preps." And yeah, it's like, so if you see us out on the sideline, we'll probably be wearing these vests that we got. Come over and say hi. We'd love to talk high school sports, which we're going to do today on Varsity 360, coming to you once again from the First Pacific Financial Studio. Thanks again to First Pacific Financial for supporting the show. But before we get into what we're going to talk about today with high school football, it's Civil War week. You're a Beaver. I'm a Duck fan. I did not go to University of Oregon, but my father taught there for 35 years. I grew up in Eugene, so I feel like I'm kind of have a little bit of a stake to claim within that school that maybe some of the other bandwagon jumpers don't have. But I'm a little melancholy with this Civil War week, because I remember when it used to be like Jonathan Smith versus Joey Harrington, 2 top 10 teams. It was always close. It was always Pac-10 or Pac-12 after dark, and you never knew what was going to happen. But now in this new era of college football, I don't know that I like it that much that Oregon's like a 35-point favorite.
Yeah, it's I was at the Oregon State game last fall. And that was the first year after the Big Ten departure of the Ducks and everything, and the vibe in the stands with the Beaver fans was kind of like, we could do without this game on the schedule, quite honestly. It's just it's kind of like it's kind of, even the years when the Ducks were really good and the Beavs weren't quite as good when they were both in the Pac-12, you could always do the you can throw out the records. It's Beavs Ducks, anything can happen kind of things, and these last 2 years, it's kind of like,
Well, it's kind of a comment on kind of where we are in college football now, and where, it's sort of this Wild West where there's some big money programs that are throwing tens of millions of dollars into their player payroll. And then there's teams like Washington State and Oregon State, which were kind of left behind and are, hopefully in 5 or 10 years, we'll have some safeguards or some guardrails on it where maybe there's a salary cap, and maybe the new iteration of the Pac-12 will get some traction and will once again kind of, because honestly, I never hated the Beavers, but I always felt it was good when both teams were competitive.
Yeah, I mean, you even go back a couple of weeks with Oregon playing Oklahoma State, which is a Big 12 program. Oklahoma State was going back and saying, we got blown out. It's kind of hard to compete against the Ducks when we only put, $2.5 million into our NIL deals, and they're putting in way more than that. And that was Oklahoma State. So yeah, it's just the whole dynamic of college football has just kind of changed. I think we went from, you can't even get like a part-time job because that would be a violation of your amateur rules. We went from one side to all the way over to the other side, where these players are just, I don't know. I guess they're still college students, but it kind of feels like they're, football players for hire.
They're professional athletes. When you're a starting quarterback at a Power 4 school, you're making over $1 million probably right now in most cases. But, I'll bring up a local analogy. You said, the Beaver fans are kind of like, why are we even playing this game? I'm going to risk sort of poking the bear here. But isn't that a little bit analogous to Skyview and Columbia River, where, one is just from a bigger league of, more resources, more size, more talent. And for a while it made sense, the scrappy underdog Columbia River, they won in that crazy game where, the field goal, the block field goal, it ended up on Monday Night Football. It kind of like that was the last little glimmer of that rivalry being like, oh, wow, anything can happen. But as time went on, it's like, no, these two teams are in completely different phases of their life, and it's probably a good thing that Columbia River focuses on what it needs to do and Skyview focuses on what it needs to do.
Yeah, this year might not have been so bad. It might not have been as lopsided, but yeah, things change. I was disappointed last year that Bay and Fort both went winless.
Yes.
Which for years would be nearly impossible, right? Because they would always play each other. So you have these two teams that would play each other year after year after year, and then they decide that no, it doesn't really work out anymore. And Bay was getting better, and Fort was still trying to build. But then last year they both went 0-9, and it would have been nice to have seen those two teams play each other last year. So. There's a lot of tradition in high school football, and I think the situation changes a little bit different from high school than in college because there's so much money and other things involved. In high school, so many other different factors, the growth of a school and those kind of things. Like Camas and Washougal used to be a big rivalry for years and years, and that's kind of gone by the wayside. So, I think you kind of go back to that history that you kind of long for.
Right. And I think that's what makes enjoyable so much Friday nights out at these high school football stadiums is that it is something a little still pure about it, whether there's a competitive imbalance between a larger program and a smaller program or not. You can still go and pay 10 or 11 or however many dollars it is to get in the game now and watch a football game, a few blocks from where you live and watch, catch up with parents if you're a parent or your friends if you're a student. That's why I thought it was, we're going to talk about our favorite stadiums that we like to go to. But before we get into that, just one more thing. When the strike was happening here at Evergreen, I was wondering how that would impact the football attendance on the first couple of Friday nights. And the first Friday night, the attendance, especially for Union and Evergreen, was really good at Mackenzie Stadium. And I recognized one of the students she was doing the ball girl sideline duties, and she was part of a Courts for Kids trip that I did with my daughter to Panama last spring. I was like, hey, are you excited to be out here? Well, how about the turnout? And she's like, yeah, it's great to see our friends because we haven't been able to see each other because we haven't had school for the first week or two. And so I think a lot of students were kind of longing for that and like, hey, with all this uncertainty, not knowing if we're going to school this week or next week, we know there's a football game on Friday. Let's go.
Yeah, and I think that's, people ask me a lot of times, what's your favorite sport to cover, right? And, often we'll say football, But I remember having a conversation one time with somebody, and they brought up a really good point. You can like the game of football, and I think a lot of us do, and we all enjoy the game of football. But really, it's the environment that it makes Friday night special. It's it's the crowds, it's 2,000 people, 1,500, whatever, in the stands. There's student bodies in the stands getting involved. There's the band, there's cheerleaders, the whole thing. And I didn't really completely understand it until the pandemic year.
Right.
When we were playing in front of empty, nobody there, and then it was just kind of like, well, this is just a game.
It's so weird.
And somebody else brought up, goes like, it's like, well, what would it be like if on Friday night we played soccer, and the soccer was like the Europeans with people blowing horns and banners and smoke and chants and all this kind of thing? Then we'd probably get really psyched about a high school soccer game if that was the environment. And so I think really that environment and again coming together of the community and a big event and I think what some schools they do to sort of help facilitate that coming together with the things that they offer at the football games kind of is what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, well, and one quick shout out to Fort Vancouver. I went out to their volleyball match against Hudson's Bay. I've been trying to get out into the field more with the camera, and I figured early season volleyball match, we probably wouldn't cover this based on like it being a, contest for the league title or anything like that, but I'm just going to head out to Fort to see their match against Hudson's Bay. And the gym was really, it was a very well attended game. Both student sections were hyped, and it was loud, and Fort won, and they were like, students were jumping up and down and everything. So again, it can be beyond football, but it's just that atmosphere when you get the kids involved and you get a hyped student section. That's really fun.
Yeah, and it was great. It's great for those two programs. The programs again that don't have a lot of success, but they still created some excitement within the rivalry between Bay and Fort, and they had kids playing out there in front of a big full gym of excitement. You know, kind of reminded me a little bit about, you know, a couple of years ago when like Nebraska, they played volleyball at the football stadium and they got
90,000 people.
Yeah, I mean, that was really cool. And so, yeah, so it doesn't necessarily like the sport. It could be just, you know, the atmosphere. You can get a good atmosphere. It's great for high school sports, whether you're talking about wrestling or basketball or volleyball or even football. You know, I think that's something that we really like is when it's a big spectacle.
So we wanted to touch on kind of, you know, what are your favorite football venues to go watch a game? And it was kind of born from something a fan, you know, asked you what this last year, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it was just Friday night. I was talking to Derek Garrison. He's the principal at Heritage High School. And he's like, hey, what's your favorite venue here, high school football venue to go to, and does food factor into it?
We don't have enough time to eat.
It's like there, you know, yeah. I was like, well, you know, I rarely eat during it. There was a time when I would cover a game at Kiggins Bowl, and they had like a barbecue, like down on the asphalt, you know, by the grandstand on one side, and it was like just kind of cooking away. And so, so you would come down from the press box and you'd do interviews after the first game, and then maybe grab a burger and then head back on up. But other than that, you know, I rarely, it's like, I'm not, especially like at Mackenzie, you know, I'm not going to be down on the field and then run back up the grandstand and get in line for a concession stand. Every once in a while, you know, if I'm just going to one game and they have like a nice food truck or something outside, I might get there a little bit early, grab something to eat, but usually, you know, we don't. So, but the perspective of what we think about stadiums, I think would have changed from like 8-10 years ago.
Yeah.
Because 8-10 years ago, we covered games almost exclusively from the press box. And so our vantage point, that's where was our vantage point. So when we would assess what was our favorite place to go to, it would be, well, how good is the press box?
Right, the place with the most room and that stays warm in November.
Yeah, you know, it's like, you know, Doc Harris had a really great, you know, big press box, and it was warm and there was room for us. But then also, like, you know, you go to Kiggins Bowl and you're up on the roof of Kiggins Bowl, and you really never got a feel for, like, what people would ask, well, how many people were there? And you were like, well, I don't really know, because by the time I came down onto the field after the game, I didn't see because I was way up top. But now we're covering games from the sidelines because, again, we got the camera out and we're shooting video. And so now we can kind of get the whole sort of vibe of the place. And so, that's what we're going to talk about here. And I thought we'd split it up and we talk first about, like, small school venues, and then like 2A venues, and then like the big venues, and we can each have one that we like going to.
All right, let's start off with the small school venues, and I like this to start it off because I think there's a certain charm in going to a small town, a small packed stadium where you know that a lot of the population of that town is out there on Friday night. And what's your favorite?
Well, my favorite, it's got to be Le Center. There's, you know, they've done a really nice job. It took like about 10 years to build the stadium there at the high school. They used to play over across the street at the middle school in an old grandstand that was built like back in the late 1960s. And I remember John Lambert, the center coach, telling me it was like the lights there weren't very good, and sometimes you'd punt the ball and it would float above the lights and go into darkness for a little bit. But the venue now they have at Le Center, and I think they've finished it completely. I haven't been to a regular season game at Le Center since they've, I believe, finished everything off there, the press box, the rooms, the concession stands and stuff. I was at a jamboree a couple weeks ago, and I didn't have time to take a look at that. But for me, the venue there, grass field, I think there's something classic about grass field, and they always have a nice grass field. There's no crown on that grass field. Like if you go to some other high school field, you'll notice the crown so that it drains. But because where the stadium there, it's kind of like on a plateau a little bit, and so I think it just drains really well, and so they can keep it pretty flat. But the vantage point from the stands, you know, you got the hills and the trees rolling. If you get there in September where you still have some daylight and you get the little sunset effect going there, and then there's the whole vibe of, you know, the community of Le Center going out and enjoying the game and supporting the team. You know, apparently last week with the game against Woodland, it was very well attended, and it's just a really nice small school venue.
I agree completely. There's something cool about La Center, the game day atmosphere, the fact that they have the bell there that you walk through by. Nothing but good things about attending a game at La Center. My favorite small school stadium, I'm going to go with Kalama. Kalama is a classic, and there's something about location. Maybe this comes from hearkening back to how we started the show, going to Oregon Duck games as a kid. My dad would take me and we'd park on campus and we would walk across the Willamette River footbridge through the woods, and you come out of the woods and you see the stadium. Not an exact comparison with Kalama, but I love it when the stadium is like the end point of a journey, and you get off the freeway and then you start going up the hill, and you go up and up and up and up and up and through the neighborhood, and at the very top of the hill is the high school and the stadium. And I just love that you go up there. They still have like the old buildings in front of the newer buildings that they've built there on the campus, but you just make your way through the town, and then you're perched up on this hill. But the field itself is still, it's not at the very top of the hill. It's still got the backdrop of the slope behind it. And so I just love that setting at Kalama.
Yeah, it's, again, if you get there in September when you have some daylight and some sun, you get to enjoy a sunset over the Columbia River from down below. Where you're sitting, if you're in the grandstand, you're looking up against the hillside. Right. So if you're on the other side, that's where you get a little bit more of that vantage point. But yeah, it's just this great location, a great viewpoint to have as a backdrop for a high school football game. And again, Kalama over the years have been very good and very competitive, and that kind of adds to the setting as well.
Well, I have to say, selfishly, I was very thrilled when Kalama came back into the Trico League. Number one, because it allows the opportunity to go to that stadium once again. But number two, it was always kind of weird because with them being in the 2B league, it's like, well, they're kind of on the boundary of the area that we cover, and when they rejoined the Trico, it happened to be sort of the same time that we're like, well, we're not really bounded by print newspaper circulation, geography anymore. We can write about, people in Kalama or Kelso or Longview can easily read our stuff as well as someone in downtown Vancouver can. So yeah, let's get Kalama into the fold. And I thought that was a very good development.
Yeah, it was, because again, I think when we made that decision to we're going to cover the leagues as a whole, the 2A GSHL and the 3A and the Trico as a whole, we picked up and started paying more attention to the Kelsos and Mark Morrises and R.A. Longs and Castle Rocks. But then there was Kalama that we kind of jumped over, and they were just kind of out on an island as one of the only 2B schools. Now, for a little bit, Stevenson was in that 2B school for a couple of years. It didn't work out for Stevenson, and they went back to the Trico, and it kind of left Stevenson kind of, again, on an island from coverage standpoint. So when they came back into the fold, it just made it so much easier just to incorporate them back into our league coverage of the Trico. And yeah, so I too was very happy for that. I don't know if I think that some of the folks in Kalama still liked competing at the 2B level, especially for football, which is so great and competitive in Southwest Washington. But it's also pretty good in the Trico League as well. And so, really, really great to have Kalama back in the fold here.
All right, let's move on to the 2A. What's your favorite 2A venue?
Favorite 2A venue? I kind of waffled back and forth, but I think I'm going to settle in on Woodland. So for us, this is back when we were covering games and we were in the press box, I always kind of compared Woodland as like a small Doc Harris, because they had this press box and it was always roomy and there was room for us and we could cover a game, and always had a nice venue to cover a game. Again, now that we're on the field, but it's still a really nice, again, in the daylight, you get those sunlight, the sunsets over there. And just a good venue to go watch a game. Lots of good parking to go to if you got to get there. And again, the only knock on Woodland is that when it gets breezy out there after sunset, it gets breezy out there. And if you're there in November or late October, it can get very chilly in Woodland. I know you've been to some playoff games
Yeah, I think it was the league finale last year between Ridgefield and Woodland, where it was a heavy mist or light rain, whatever you call it, but it was about 40 degrees and about 20-mile-an-hour winds. It was brutal. So I too like Woodland because ever since they built the new high school, I'm glad they built it on the outskirts of town, because you look out behind the scoreboard and you just got fields.
Yeah.
And if you catch it early in the year, sometimes you get the breeze coming in off those fields, and it's like, it smells like farming territory here. The good kind of farm smells. Yeah, because there are not so good ones, but the good ones like the corn and the hay and the alfalfa. It just reminds you that this is what small town football is all about. You're not in the middle of the city. You got some folks out there that know how to work the land, and that's a good thing, especially if you're talking about getting big, strong linemen.
Yeah, and they have other good facilities there for like softball and baseball and things too. So, I always enjoy going to Woodland.
I like Hawkinson because of what you said. They play on grass. I think we can remember a few mud bowls in recent years that have happened out there. I think of an anecdote that Meg uncovered in her Dog Days series when she was embedded with Hawkinson, and she asked one of the assistant coaches, "Can you confirm or deny that there is a player's cleat that is buried underneath the field somewhere because it was lost in one of these games where you had like basically 4 inches of mud and a kid lost his boot?" But the coach would neither confirm or deny, but he said it is a distinct possibility that there, because of the mud, there is a cleat buried under that field somewhere. But again, it's just the classic like rural venue. I mean, you have to kind of drive a ways to get out to Hawkinson. It's not near any of the freeways. You kind of have to, if you're coming from the south, you go on this long straight country road for about 3 miles past the Hawkinson Meadows Community Park, and you feel like you've arrived at a destination, a gathering point when you get out there.
Yeah, it's they got, so as a difference from La Center, where they have sort of this tiered situation. At Hawkinson, they're kind of sitting right on the water table there. It's like there's a lot of just farmlands that can when it gets wet and soggy, that it can't absorb all that rain, and it will come out. And so but Hawkinson's done a really nice job. They have the new grandstand there on the west side of the grandstand there. I remember going to games when that was just a couple bleachers and you were sitting on the other side with the tower press box thing. I think the whole thing about the 2A Greater St. Helens League is they have different venues that all have their own little quirks, and I like going to Columbia River. I like the backdrop with Cougar Creek in the background backdrop. That was another stadium that before they redid the grandstand was like we didn't like going to River, because we would be they would bring out a table and they put it on top of the bleacher for us to sit at, and then you were just kind of sitting there, and then you got fans standing up in front of you and shouting, and you're all right in the mix there. And then Washougal Fishback Stadium, it's classic. It's been there since the early 60s. But if you're ever at Fishback Stadium, if you're sitting in the middle of the grandstand, this is something that I just kind of a couple of years ago noticed, that if you're sitting in the middle of the grandstand at Fishback Stadium at Washougal, you are not at the 50-yard line.
I never noticed that.
So the grandstand is offset from the field, and the reason for that is when the stadium was originally built in the 60s, there was no track around the football field. It was just the field. The track was someplace else, and then they decided, no, we're going to put a track around the football field. Well, in order to make it fit, they had to shift the football field up a little bit, and so now the middle of the grandstand's at the 40, and there's another bleacher off to the right of the grandstand that kind of extend it. But it's I was it was a few years back where I was on the visiting sideline. I was looking up at the grandstand going, it's not centered, So, and then I've never been to a game at Longview Memorial Stadium. It's just one of the two high school stadiums in this area that I've never been to is in White Salmon and at Longview Memorial. I don't know why, it just happens. But they're in the process of doing a refurb on that. So they had the new turf and they got the message board up. They've kind of, repainted the bleachers. They put in a new roof this past summer and a new press box and a new entry. And they're going to have some more additions coming on in that project later on. So it's being spruced up. I think those are. Oh, then we already talked about Woodland, Washington. Richfield. We haven't done. Yeah, Richfield.
Richfield's a fun when you see Mount St. Helens in the background. That's cool.
Yeah, it used to be a really cool venue. Again, several years ago, when you would look out from the grandstand, you would see these rolling hills and trees and Mount St. Helens in the back. Now it's all houses. It's all houses now. So it's just progress the way things go. We talked about Woodland in the wind. Richfield can also we've been to like Raptors games in the summer. You get there at 6:30 and the game starts and it's sunny and it's warm, and then the sun comes down and that breeze comes in that blows out to right field. And it can get chilly in July. Well, they can do that in the fall at Richfield. That stadium, they're going to celebrate, and I think in 2 weeks, the 50th anniversary of their first game played at that stadium on September 26th. So a lot of quirky places in the 2A GSHL. It's kind of fun to visit all of them.
Yeah. And before we go into the larger venues, I think I want to preface it by saying we're, I think, very fortunate that we have stadiums with history. Yeah. And we have stadiums with unique engineering, unique design. I think of the archetype of the classic high school stadium somewhere like Sparks Stadium up in Puyallup, or where it's just very basic. You just have a grandstand on this side, a metal grandstand on the other side, a track, and a football/soccer/lacrosse field. And it seems it's like remember in the 80s in Major League Baseball where they built all those same kinds of stadiums, the Riverfront Stadium,
multi-purpose
Veteran Stadium. It's like that's what those stadiums feel like. And you see them elsewhere up mainly in the Puget Sound area. And so that's why I think we're lucky to have places like Kiggins Bowl, like McKenzie, like Dock. But out of those, what's your favorite?
Yeah, so again, there was a question Derek Harrison asked me, and I said, you know what, I like Kiggins Bowl. It's and I remember talking to John Eagle last year. I was doing a story about the 50th anniversary of McKenzie Stadium, and he was at that time Westland was coming to play Skyview at Kiggins, and he's like, oh yeah, I was telling my kids, you're going to go to this place, and it's cool, and it's got history behind it. I can remember going to Kiggins when I first arrived at the Columbian, first kind of time, and you kind of sit there and you look around and go, what was this thing built for?
Yeah, it's like it looks like a baseball stadium.
It's like it's not like sharp enough to be like a baseball stadium, but it's too curved for a football stadium, And it was actually just sort of built into the hillside. The grandstand was built that way because that's the way the hillside was constructed, and it was constructed to be sort of something for everything. You could have baseball there, you could have football there, you could have, they used to have high school graduations there. They used to have an Easter service at Kiggins Bowl every year. But they did a really good refurb job on it about 5 years ago, right around the pandemic. Seat backs on all the seats there, and they added some other nice amenities. The field house on the north side of the field, I know teams appreciate that because the locker rooms that are underneath were kind of, old and dungeony. I think they still use them sometimes in doubleheaders, but I think they really enjoy those fields, and they have the concession stands above and below. It's just a cool setting. You're just in this setting. You got the hillside on one side, you got trees on the other side. I-5 goes roaring by, and most of the time you hardly even know it's there, because
unless a trucker hits their unmuffled compression brakes,
it's just a lot of cool history and behind it, and it's just kind of a nice thing. Even though, like, if you're sitting again at the 50-yard line, because of the curvature of the bowl, you are like way away from the field, but. And also, if you want to be under the cover, like under the part that's where the roof is, you got to be up back on that. And so, again, you are a long way. But I was up last week, I think it was the Fort game, late second half. I kind of moved up off from the field and was heading, and I just kind of sat up in the grandstand, just kind of view from up there. It's still a good viewing spot. Yeah, it's just kind of the one drawback with Kiggins is that if it's a really big game,
Parking.
Yeah, parking is just it's not. You got to park there at Discovery Middle School, and or you're in the neighborhood around there, and I always feel bad for the folks who live in that neighborhood. It's just it can get.
Oh, I've parked behind the Safeway once or twice.
Oh, really? Yeah. Okay. I haven't gone quite that
8
far.
or 9 blocks away. So, yeah, I like Kiggins too. Obviously, you did a big piece a couple summers ago about the history of it. It's always fun to kind of walk in along the roof line and see like the old ticket booth.
Yeah.
And, the old and it's just like, what was this like back in the 1940s or whenever it was brand new? What was that like to be a fly on the wall in that time? So I definitely appreciate the history of Kiggins.
Yeah, if you use the bathrooms up at the top of the grandstand, there's bathrooms by the concession stand. There's these 2 staircases that go up where people want to go up to the press box there. Well, that's how people used to come in to the stadium. They used to come in through that, because at the top of that, you'll notice, if you ever just kind of wander up at the top of those stairs, you'll notice on the far side there are like ticket booths, the original ticket booths up there. And if you also notice, if there's like a utility road that heads off to the right and heads up to the Covington House up there, and that's how you used to get into Kiggins Bowl. You used to come in off of Main and down through there and get your tickets, and then down the stairs and into the bowl. It had to be reconfigured when they built Discovery Middle School, and they also had to make it ADA accessible with the ramp and stuff. So, you can just kind of wander around when you're at a game there and kind of notice these little quirks that kind of reveal some of the history. They've been playing high school football games there since 1946, and the structure itself has been there since, I think, 38. So there's a lot of history there.
Well, and they've added a little bit of a modern twist with the new clubhouse and locker room, and then the track and field off to the side so teams can warm up.
Yeah, but both Heritage and Bay, we were over on that other field, and they were going through full warm-ups while the Fort Tootle Lake game was going. And it's just kind of a venue that is good for the players, it's good for the fans, and it's got a lot of history.
I don't think we can leave out Doc in this, though. I mean, and I think it's because, number one, Doc is always interesting in that it's away from campus, and it really feels like, despite how big Camas has gotten as a town, how much it's grown, it still feels like the whole town comes out for Camas football. It's a community that loves their football, and I just think they do such a good job on the presentation of game day. Everything from blowing up the big inflatable, mean-looking football guy for the kids to come running out to, they have the mill horn when they score a touchdown, but the grandstands are usually packed. You're down there after a game, and you see the kids who are in middle school or even elementary school come out and look at the player, meet the players and saying like, that's going to be me in a few years. And so I just think it's a special game day experience at Doc.
Yeah, they do it. The band is always great, and the band has the tradition where they learn the fight song of the opposing team. It's always kind of fun when you're at Doc and you sit. And a lot of times, sometimes they'll be in a playoff game, in November they'll be there. And you'll sit there and the band will come out on the track and they're playing the Camas fight song. And then they march around the track and they go over to the visiting side. And it's always fun to watch the visiting fans when they recognize their own fight song is being played. That's always kind of a cool thing that they do at Camas. A lot of cool things about Camas. They have some food trucks out there, and they have some. I think apparently they have some new ones out there this yeyear. So there's good eating to be had if you want to get there early and get something to eat prior to the game. The one sort of drawback to Doc being able to host like bigger events is, again, the parking issue. Right. They have this small parking lot at the stadium, and then there's also parking available at the district offices over there. But otherwise, you're in this like usually I'm on like Garfield over by the elementary school on the other side where I park, and I just kind of walk my way on back in. Doc Harris is one of the places that was again when we were covering from the press box. It was like our favorite place because they had this roomy press box. They had a space set out for us when we were going to come and cover a game there. Recent years, I don't know if it's because we don't go up in the press box as much because we're covering games from the sideline now when we can, unless the weather is just completely terrible. When the weather is completely terrible, they have a space for us, but it's no longer in the press box. It's on a table that's on these areas to the left outside. And that's fine, that's fine. It's like, hey, it's great. You created a spot for us. It's wonderful. The only problem is when I've been there is it's right behind the band.
Oh, yeah.
Right behind the band. It's like I got a sousaphone in my line of sight when I'm covering from out there. So, so other than that, it's like, I appreciate the hospitality. It's just, And then you have to work your way down, if you need to use a restroom at halftime, you always got to fight through the band. The band's coming, the band's leaving.
But it's a small price to pay for a well-attended, enthusiastic fan base.
We'll take that. We'll take that
over a half-empty grandstand anytime.
Absolutely. So it's we always enjoy going to Doc Harris Stadium, and they're always very accommodating for us.
Yes.
So,
well, let's wrap it up with one final question. What is your favorite out-of-the-area stadium in the state that you've been to? Yeah,
you threw this idea out, to me yesterday, and I was trying to think about it, and I don't. I just kind of think that I haven't really gone to and covered a whole lot of games, like playoff games, out of the area. So the games recently that I've gone to out of area were a couple of Washougal playoff games. One was against Highline up in Burien. They've got a nice stadium up there. And then I also went to a game at Ording, which was was a 2A. And then I covered Skyview and Graham Kapowson playoff game at Art Crate Field in Spanaway, and that's a nice venue as well. So the other venues that I've been at, I haven't been to cover football. I've been to cover soccer, like Sparks Stadium and Federal Way. The Federal Way Stadium at the Federal Way High School, they just renovated and redid that. That's a really nice facility. It's kind of like McKenzie, where they got the two grandstands on both sides. One grandstand's kind of built into a hillside a little bit. It's not quite as tall as McKenzie, but a lot of good seating, a lot of good for the fans. And then they've got a field house down at one side where they have 4 locker rooms so that, teams can come and go, and it's very convenient for them. So I was really impressed with the Federal Way Memorial Stadium that they've renovated. And then I also went to, I think it was Renton Memorial Stadium for the River 2A soccer. Again, also another nice facility. The weird thing about Renton Stadium is that it's right next door to some Boeing testing something or another. It's like it's like in the middle of the game, there's a jet engine going off, and you're like, "What are we?" And then they're just testing some jet engine over there. It's kind of weird, but I really kind of like Federal Way. There's some places in the stadium or the state that I would love to go to that I just never been.
Maybe Olympic Stadium out by Aberdeen, Pine Bowl in Spokane.
I saw Olympics. I was watching videos of Kingsway. And they're playing at Olympic Stadium in Hoquiam. And that was it's kind of weird because the football field runs across this way, and then there's a baseball diamond that plays
the other way.
This way.
Yeah.
And so right around the 20, 30-yard line, the infield skin is in play for football. It's always kind of interesting and weird to see that in a high school venue. But yeah, that was interesting when I was watching that on video.
My favorite stadium in the entire state, if you have never been there, you should make a detour to go to the north end of Tacoma and see Stadium Bowl. It is unmatched in view, grandeur, and history. You walk into it and you come to Stadium High School, which is, it's like a castle.
Yes.
There's a huge history behind it, and the railroad barons of the time that made Tacoma tick in the early 1900s and everything. It just it's a school that's been the setting for movies. And then you look down on the little itty bitty field inside this huge bowl, most of which is it's basically a stadium that used to seat 100,000 people. And then at one end, it just drops off down to Commencement Bay. And so Babe Ruth has played there in an exhibition game. Woodrow Wilson spoke there. And now they play high school football there. And so if you ever get a chance to go to Tacoma, and you don't even have to see a game there, because honestly, once you get down into the bowl, you kind of lose a little bit of the grandeur. But looking at it from above, I cannot think of a more unique setting for a high school football game, with this like castle of a high school sitting right over it.
Yeah, I actually interviewed for a job at the Tacoma News Tribune like years ago, and during that interview, like we were heading out to go to get lunch, and the editor who was editing me, he's like, "Hey, we're going to take a little side trip," and we went over by Stadium High School and took a look at the Stadium Bowl, and yeah, that was always a cool spot, cool venue. It was unique, unlike any other in the state or maybe anywhere.
Well, that's one of the cool things about high school football, is that you are going to find these like unique, quirky settings, and they're accessible. They're, you can go down on the field after the game, and you don't have to, go through a bunch of hoops to go out and enjoy some football on a Friday night. So hopefully you'll be able to do that, sometime in these next few weekends if you're tuning in. But we can't wait to be out there. Got a bunch of good games coming up this for week 3. 2A Greater St. Helens League play starts. You have a rivalry game in Prairie and Battleground, so be sure to follow us on 360 Preps.
And the Trico starts this week as well.
The Trico too. Can't forget the Trico. But thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back next time.